is Terry Bradshaw, quarterback, Pittsburgh Steelers.
It's 7:15. There's a new home run champion of all time, and it's Henry Aaron.
This is baseball, Major League Baseball. And this is
ABC's Monday Night Baseball, live from Fenway Park in Boston, Massachusetts.
Looking. He's under the gun. He's flat. He throws. It is.
June 9th, 1975, and a true American hero on the cover of Sports Illustrated, Rocky Bleier of the Pittsburgh Steelers. More on that in a bit, but first, hello to all. Bill, Mark, what's going on, guys?
Not a lot. Just a great night.
It is. It's the summer is fast approaching.
Oof.
Everything is changing now. Longer days, hotter
days.
Hotter days. Sun going down at past 8 o'clock. I love it.
I do
I
too.
could take a
It's
walk
tough when you
now.
have a daughter, though, that doesn't want to go to bed because she says it's still light outside.
Yeah.
Like 8:30, and I'm going, well, dude, you got to still go to bed.
Yeah,
Yeah,
kids
but
in Norway go to sleep.
Yeah, exactly. You shut up and go to bed.
I just love the fact I can take a short walk at 8 o'clock at night. It's still
Yeah.
light.
Yep. As we said, a few days until summer, a time for vacations, especially, Billy, when you have younger kids. Any summer trips for you guys when you were kids that stick out to you, a family trip or a weekend trip or anything that summer was just like, oh my gosh, this was great.
We used to go to Lake Tahoe and to Incline Village on the North Shore on the California side of the border, and we would stay at the Stevenson's Motor Inn, like Stevenson's Holiday Motor Inn, which I thought was great because they had a pool there, but also in the back was a pier for the lake, so you could swim in the pool or the lake. And half the pier had been broken off in a storm, so you had to literally jump into the lake, swim to the leftover part of the pier, climb up on it, and then you could jump off or do whatever you wanted to.
No, we didn't have any money. We didn't go on any vacations. We drank a lot of Cragmont colas.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think lucky's the right word. My parents got divorced.
Yeah.
And then we moved far away. So for the summer, I would come from Tennessee back to the Bay Area where my dad lived. And then when my mom and my stepdad moved to Los Angeles, still, I would go up. So, my dad, he was not used to having the kids around. So he worked a lot, and then when it was weekend or nighttime, it was fun time. And he didn't have to do like any of the discipline because there was no school. So I literally think I went to a restaurant with my mom and stepdad like twice in my life.
Oh,
And
wow.
with my dad, it was like twice a week or something. It was just completely different worlds. We'd go out to the restaurants or ball games or movies. I never did any of that with my mom or stepdad, because that was my life. That was real life, and the other was vacation.
Yeah.
So
That's fun, though.
yeah, absolutely. Let's get going. Scorecard. Marky Mark, what do you got?
Well, I got Evel Knievel. So, after the Snake River, he tries to jump 13 London transport buses at Wembley Stadium. Doesn't go so well again. He crashes. He goes back to the hospital. And you know what? He's going to announce his retirement. But in the hospital, he has second thoughts and says, show must go on. I'm not stopping. That's our Evel for you.
Yeah, I think, some of those guys, right, evil boxers, they just can't not be in the limelight. That's why they did it for a long time. And
It's adrenaline rush.
stepping away is just really difficult. And you will find that out as we keep going here in the boxing world. I think more so in the boxing world where they just, and the paydays just started becoming so much more and more that it was tough to walk away from,
But also, if you watch that video of Evel Knievel crashing, after that crash, They didn't rush him off to the hospital. They walked him back up the ramp so he could talk to the crowd and say, I'm going to retire.
Oh,
Like nowadays, they get you off. No, no. They walked him back up and thank you. I'm going to
Right?
retire.
Yeah.
And then they took him to the hospital.
I'm dead, but thank you.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
I mean, could you picture that nowadays of someone doing that and then instead of taking him to the hospital, they go, no, no, got to meet with the crowd first, boy.
Right. Gotta talk first. Okay.
But I'm saying a lot of ball players won't talk after a game they give up a home run or give up a touchdown pass. But Evil Knievel's going out with like bones hanging off him, going, I'm done. Just a different world, man.
I got one. George McGinnis just lost in the ABA finals, but now he could be heading to the NBA, and the New York Knicks, they're the ones that signed him illegally, I might add. The 76ers drafted McGinnis out of college. I didn't realize he went to Indiana University. They own the rights to him, but the Knicks are trying to circumvent that. This can end up in court. In the long run, McGinnis did go to the NBA that year, but it was the 76ers, and I remember that 76ers team, man, they were loaded.
They were.
They would end up going to the finals a couple years later and losing to the Blazers with Bill Walton. But Dr. J, I mean, they must have gone from like nothing to, I mean, think of that. In the offseason, they signed Dr. J and George McGinnis one year. That's just crazy.
Like a legendary MVP of seemed like every season in the ABA and a guy that was what 21-12 or whatever, 28-12.
Yeah. McGinnis was a seriously good player. Billy.
Okay, this just comes from Maryland. Howard County Police Chief Robert O. Matthews Jr., just know he's Jr. He requested 3,800 to buy 25 pairs of boxing gloves, 25 head guards, and 50 mouthpieces for the police academy, all better to develop physical dexterity and combativeness in his rookies. The main idea, he says, is to show new officers what it's like to receive a blow as well as administer one. I've been struck any number of times while making arrests, says Matthews. Oh, there you go. I'm sure that would go over well nowadays.
Yeah.
Damn.
Very good. Hey, let's do some They Said It. I think we all have one. Bill, you go first.
Sure, Ben Jipko, he's a track athlete on pro track competition. Running for money doesn't make you run fast. It makes you run first.
Yes. Damn straight.
For sure. Mark?
I have a guy we've talked about on the podcast before, Fred Shiro, the Philadelphia Flyers coach, denying that he's unemotional. He says, I'm like a duck, calm above the water, but paddling like hell underneath.
Yeah. Most coaches, I would think, are like that. I've got a couple that both have to do with driving. Lloyd Ruby, 47-year-old Indy driver, asked if he would retire after running only 7 laps at this year's 500. I can drive 20 more years if I only have to go 7 laps a year. So he's pacing himself. That's the original pace car.
Yes.
And then Rocky Bridges, manager of the Phoenix Giants, on his new diet drink. You mix 2 jiggers of scotch to 1 jigger of Metricol. So far, I've lost 5 pounds and my driver's license.
What is
like
Metricol?
DUI jokes by Rocky Bridges.
Hey, get drunk. In those days, my God, yeah.
We'll talk a little bit about that.
Does anyone know what Metricol is?
Powdered diet food introduced in the 60s, designed to be mixed with water and consumed as a beverage.
There you go.
Oh boy, yeah, that sounds good.
Sounds disgusting. Let's move ahead to the Reds are coming. Pete Rose has been moved to third base, and the Reds are taking off as a team, 16-7 since Sparky Anderson moved Rose to the hot corner. Rose came up as a second baseman, but has played the outfield quite a bit for the past few years. Played it pretty well, to be honest. And keep in mind, 1973, he's the MVP of the National League, and now they're asking him to change positions, something that would not go over as well with this present day bunch of athletes, right, Bill?
Yeah, you look at Rafael Devers of the Red Sox. They moved him off third because Bregman's a better fielder than him. And then they said, okay, we're going to make it the DH. But then they lost their first baseman and asked Devers to go to first base. He said, "No, you've already moved me once. I'm not doing it again." But back in the day, Pete Rose, when they asked him to move to third, he goes, "I'll give it a try." Just, the difference between, what they do nowadays and what they do then. And Pete Rose was truly a team player. He didn't, he made 13 errors in 75 and 76. But man, for a guy that went from being a two-time Gold Glove winning outfielder to third base to do as well as he did is impressive.
I mean, now today you get players that play all over the field.
That's true.
In the article, it mentioned that Johnny Bench had played 36 games at third
Yeah.
the year
Yeah.
prior. So, you're talking about one of the greatest catchers and very good defensively as well. So, back then it was, first of all, winning meant so much more back then because they didn't get paid as much, and going to the playoffs, these guys got money for doing that, and it made a difference. So winning, I'm not saying that was what the driving factor was, but it's pretty crazy that we have players nowadays that not only refuse to do it, but even feel like they have the right to refuse it.
Yes.
I mean, it's crazy. It's absolutely.
Yeah,
I think it was a team first mentality,
Yes.
the Reds.
There was a lot
And-
more camaraderie. They
Right.
were, there was different leagues, and there wasn't as much fraternization. There was the teams wanted to win.
Yep.
I think for the Dodgers, didn't Bill Russell play in the outfield, and wasn't Craig Biggio a catcher before he came to second base? I
Yep,
mean, so they
he was.
moved in those days.
You said Garvey played third when he came
Yeah,
in. He wasn't
yeah.
very good at that. I think Lopes actually moved around.
That might have been Lopes, might have been the
look,
outfielder.
I was going to mention, to me, because right around 75, 76, that's when I started paying attention.
Me
Rose
too.
was a third baseman to
Me
me.
too. That's exactly, yeah.
I had to look back, when I got older, I was like, I didn't know he played second base when he came up, and then third base, and he ended up playing mostly first base at the end of his career. He basically played all over the place. So
It's funny. I knew him as a third baseman too when I was growing. That's when I first started. I thought, Pete Rose, a third baseman. I never knew anything about before that.
versatility, that's a good thing, man. Versatility, never a bad thing.
But in regards to that Reds team in 75, just how dominant they were, do you realize they played 81 home games that year, and they were 64 and 17 in those 81 home games.
Wow.
Yet that, and mentioned this before, yet that year they actually lost the season series to the Dodgers. They lost 10 of the 18 games they played, which is amazing.
And they finished 10 games up on him or something like that.
Well, no, here's the amazing thing. When this article came out, the Dodgers actually had a game and a half lead over the Reds.
Wow.
And the Reds would end up winning by 20 games over the Dodgers.
That's it.
by the time the season ended.
Dang.
Yeah,
So
they
that's-
basically right around when Rose started playing third
Yeah.
base,
Yeah, maybe
they
that was the
caught
impetus.
fire and pretty much remained on fire for the rest of the season.
The last thing I want to say about this, they talked about their infield. We all know their infield. Their annual salary, all told, was $650,000. In 2025, the minimum salary in MLB is $760,000.
Yeah.
So the whole infield back then isn't even the major league minimum nowadays.
And Morgan's about to be this is the first of his 2 MVPs.
Yeah, I love Joe Morgan.
Yeah, Bench, Perez, Hall of Famer.
Yep.
Yeah, they'd make quite a bit more, wouldn't they?
They wouldn't be the big red machine.
Not for very long.
No.
Yeah. Hey, a final drive to the finish by Kenny Moore, who himself was a great runner and would write for Sports Illustrated for 25 years. Also wrote the biography of Steve Prefontaine. This is a tough one. One of the premier long-distance runners at that time and, USA history, Steve Prefontaine. He wins a race in Eugene against another great runner, Frank Shorter. Afterwards, they go to a party. His parents are there, and his high school coach, beers flow. We kind of joked around about Rocky Bridges saying, I lost my driver's license. And that's because, there was a time not that long ago when we grew up where drinking and driving was kind of okay. It was kind of normal.
Yep.
It wasn't really until the mid 80s when Mothers Against Drunk Driving really started. I mean, I don't know, now like my kids, if they know any of their friends have had anything to drink, there's no thought of anyone getting behind the wheel. I mean, I know it still happens. I'm not naive, but it's just a really different part the fabric of our country. And back then it happened. And in this case, Prefontaine had too much to drink. He drops Shorter off, and on his way back home, he crashes and dies. So really, really horrible story when it comes to one of the greatest distance runners in U.S. history.
And Shorter, think about Frank Shorter. He gets dropped off at his house, and that's the last time anyone sees Prefontaine alive.
Yeah.
And when this article comes out, they're showing you pictures of, Steve laughing and stuff and going, these were images taken just before he dies, it's like the day or two before he dies. It just shows you how precious life is and stuff. And I'll tell you, driving takes such concentration. It's not even drinking. I'll tell you a story that just happened to me today. I am driving and I start thinking about something, and then I start really focusing on whatever that thought was.
Mm-hmm.
And the next thing I know, I've driven past where I wanted to turn.
Right.
So I'm thinking about this and I'm not concentrating on the road.
Yeah.
And that's how you can get. So just imagine drinking, how that impairs you even further. So the worst thing, texting, and it takes your concentration away from the road, but that happens. So many people don't pay attention. They just take it for granted.
Yep. You're totally right.
And Prefontaine would have just been, mind you, it's 50 years later, but he was perfect for the social media type era because his attitude and the way he spoke and as honest as he was would have just gone over gangbusters.
Yeah.
He had talked about, having to run against the Poles and the Czechs, which is another thing they wouldn't just call them nowadays. He said it'd be like running against high school kids. And I hate this gung-ho run for the red, white, and blue attitude that AAU spouts. If that's important to some people, fine, more power to them. But damn it, I wish they'd leave me alone to do what I want to do, and that's run against the best.
Yeah.
Just, he didn't come off as a guy that was, maybe friendly, but he would have been perfect in an era where, people want to hear everyone's opinion.
Absolutely.
And they made, I think, 2 movies on Prefontaine. I want to see.
Yeah, one of them was Prefontaine.
Right. One was with, I think, Billy Crudup playing him.
Yeah, I think you're right. And when they talk, and movies aside, Prefontaine never lost a collegiate race at 3 miles, 5,000 meters, 6 miles, or 10,000 meters. Damn, the guy was just, I don't know enough about him, but you read the stats.
Same, but you got to think that a year later, 1976 Olympics, that he would have made a name for himself. He already did.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You just said he made 2 movies and a book and stuff like that. But really, the one thing missing from his resume was Olympic gold, and you got to think that that was in his future, possibly. Steve Prefontaine, dead at the age of 24.
And if you guys get a chance, check out the Prefontaine memorial of the concrete rocks that he hit.
Mm-hmm.
Check that out. It's really memorialized.
Right. I see a picture of it right here.
Yeah, do you see it?
Yeah.
Everyone's got stuff on it. He is so beloved in Oregon. He's sort of like a folk hero there.
Folk hero, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, he was the most popular athlete in Oregon.
Yes.
And Jim Ryan and Frank Shorter and those guys is, leading to the boom in running in the 70s.
Right. Like when we talked with Marty LaQuarrie a couple of weeks ago, we talked to him because track and field was on the cover of Sports Illustrated. Track and field was a major sport 50 years ago, and he was one of the Prefontaine, one of the major characters in that.
And the memorial, the at the site of that crash, it's the plaque says, "For your dedication and loyalty to your principles and beliefs, for your love, warmth, and friendship, for your family and friends, you are missed by so many, and you will never be forgotten."
Newest Kids on the Block by Curry Kirkpatrick. This is about professional volleyball, Mark.
Yep, it was a co-ed volleyball league. So think about it. This was a league where men and women could play together. It was the International Volleyball Association. They had 2 divisions, but all the teams were like Western teams. There was no team like east of the Mississippi. They were all in the West. So it was kind of interesting how they came up with the assignments and stuff like that. But it lasted only 5 years. It started in 75, and by 1980, it was no more.
We always hear about the East Coast bias, but in that professional volleyball league, it was a West Coast bias.
Yeah.
Shortstop with a short fuse. This was about shortstop Tim Foley, who was with the Expos at the time and a true sign of the times of baseball from 50 years ago. This guy was not much of a hitter. Back then, definitely an option for a team to have a good glove, no stick shortstop. I think of Mark Belanger,
Belanger.
Orioles.
Yep.
Dick
You mentioned
Schofield.
it. Dick Schofield later on with the Angels. Mark, you mentioned Tom Verizon, who was going to be
Yeah.
this next great thing in Detroit, but they found a shortstop that actually could hit. So,
Yes.
a lot of shortstops. But I remember Johnny LaMastra of the Giants,
Yes, I do too.
Rob
The Spire.
Rob Piccolo.
Well, the shortstop's the one position where
Allman.
you're wanted for your defense. So
Yeah.
they're more willing to take the lighter hitter. I mean, Dave Concepcion was kind of like the weakest hitter on that big red machine. He was still a great player, but
And if you go back to those times, you think about it, one of the better hitters at shortstop was Freddie Patek, 5'5".
Yep. Yep.
Foley played in the bigs for 16 years. You guys know how many home runs he hit?
14?
25.
Yeah.
That's a month for Otani.
Hit
I
250.
know that, Mark. You're right.
Or Cal Raleigh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hit 250. He didn't walk. He didn't really run. He hit singles. Not many of them. But this article talks more about Foley's temperament. And Billy, who cares if he can hit? Tell me about his wife.
His wife, I think Mark was telling me this earlier. Was she part of the Playboy Club in Montreal?
Yep. Yep.
Just a beautiful woman. And she kept calling him baby. Baby, baby. And so when you think of, a lot of ball players, at least have we've noticed, sometimes date these beautiful women and they just sort of go by the wayside. Well, Jeanette Pediceri, she's still married to Tim Foley, but she's a very
Didn't they have
beautiful
5
woman.
kids or something?
Yeah, I believe you're right. But the thing that got me, not just the fact, her beauty, was the Expos tried to get him to stop dating her. They said it gave the club a bad image.
Hmm.
Could you imagine saying that?
Oh my God! Nowadays,
That's all athletes are married to.
I know that.
Right.
And the thing is,
Yeah.
every one of them dated Kardashian. And
Right.
after a while, you can't tell them not to.
Right.
Not to mention, like you said, 5 kids and 51 years later, Expos. Oh, just kidding. Sorry about that.
And Montreal's not even a team anymore, so their marriage outlasted their whole organization. I mean,
And then some. Mark, he wasn't much of a hitter, but he was a good athlete, wasn't he?
He sure was. He was a 3-sport athlete at Notre Dame High School in Sherman Oaks that I just drove by the other day. He was the Section 3 Player of the Year in his senior year, but he was also a really good basketball and football player and supposedly was offered a scholarship to play quarterback at USC under John McKay. So that must tell you something right then and there.
one thing I was reading about with Foley going on his hitting in 1982, Tim Foley walked how many times?
14?
14. Good God, Joe. That was
a complete guess.
total ever for 150 games or more. Who's the guy that broke Foley's record? Ozzie Guillen.
Oh, wow, really?
And also, the thing I remember about Foley, because he played with the Angels, he always choked up on his bat.
Yeah.
He used to have his hand so close to the barrel. And so the
I wonder how
bottom
you
half
could
of the
hit
bat,
that way.
that was always, and I thought, man, how does he do that?
Eddie Brinkman was a no-hit shortstop with the Senators and Tigers, and he did that too. And I'm thinking, yeah, you can't hit for power that way, can you?
No, and you're more putting the ball in play. So in this day and age, Foley would be not in the major leagues. I mean, no, it's just, and that's not a bad thing. He was a good player. Obviously, he did his time, but nowadays, man, the home runs, you don't walk.
Let's still talk a little more baseball. I get such a big kick that we have been doing the show for 18 months. And in this issue, Rocky Bleier on the cover. We had Rocky on last September. Curry Kirkpatrick wrote one of the stories, had him on 2 or 3. We have
3. I think he's 3-timer, I think.
Yeah, I think so. And we had Jim Cott on, who's featured last May when we had him on, or should I call him Jim Kitty Cott? His name is pronounced Cott, but that was his nickname, Kitty, which they talked about in this article was kind of strange because his nickname or his last name is not Cat, it's Cott. But whatever. He was waived by the Twins towards the end of the '73 season because they thought he was pretty much done, and the White Sox picked him up. He wins 21 games in 1974, another 20 in 75, and would pitch in the big leagues another 10 years until 1983. So Jim Cott, a past our prime favorite this week in baseball. Speaking of, what else you got?
I just want to mention about the Jim Cott that Johnny Sane was his pitching coach with Minnesota. Couple years, he goes 43 and 24. He pitches 569 innings. Then in 2 full years in Chicago, they hire Sane again. He wins 41 games, like you said, Scott. He pitches 580 innings. Dang, man. Johnny Sane, why would that not be part of the deal? Anytime Jim Cott came there, you bring him.
Right? What else is going on?
Dick Williams, he responded to Boston pitcher Bill Lee's suggestion that the weak hitting Angels take batting practice in their hotel lobby. But Williams tried to have fun with it. He wanted his players to swing miniature bats at wiffle balls, but was thwarted by hotel officials, so he wouldn't let them do it in the lobby. So he got stopped.
Mark, what do you got?
Well, there's this hitter on the Yankees, and he had 3 homers to help the Yankees to a 4-3 week. I think he drove in 6 runs during that week, and his last name is Bonds.
Never heard of him.
Never. Wait, that can't be Barry Bonds, can it? No, it's his dad, Bobby. And people just forget what a great player Bobby was. I mean, everyone knows about Barry, but people forget Bobby was really, really good.
Well, let's just say that Barry had some good genes.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's one of the few. How many people can you know? I was thinking Griffey, that the son has overshadowed the dad.
Yeah,
the dad was a great player. I was thinking Griffey's and the Bonds. Is there others?
Let's see.
I don't know were the Boones, because
I was just going to say, as hitters for sure, Bob was a very good defensive catcher.
Yeah.
But not a hitter like either of his 2 sons.
No. And remember, the grandfather Ray was also a ball player.
Yeah. But I mean, Ken Griffey Jr. and Barry Bonds basically blotted out their dad.
Yeah, they're both, Mount Rushmore type guys.
Yes, but I don't know if there's any more of that.
Cecil and Prince Fielder.
Oh, Cecil and Prince, that's an interesting one. They had like very similar careers.
Right. And Cecil hit over 50 homers in a season.
Yeah. I saw a great clip the other day of an old one of Prince. He's running in foul territory. You guys ever see this? And the ball lands, and he's right by the stands, and he reaches in, he grabs a chip out of some guy's nachos. Oh, I love that. I love this too. I love when this happens on the show. Last week we had Tom Grieve, Mr. Ranger, on to talk about the Rangers and Billy Martin from back in the day. I had never heard this story, and he told us in length about how he was really hoping, against hope, that Billy Martin and Willie Davis might come to blows because of this story that was in SI. A week later, Willie Davis of the Rangers went on a sit-down strike in center field when teammate Steve Hargan refused to retaliate by throwing at Red Sox batters after Willie had been brushed back with a pitch by Rick Wise. Fortunately for the Rangers and Davis, no balls were hit to center field during his fit of protest. So I just thought that was interesting. I'd never heard that story.
No.
And, Willie was crouching down like a catcher for 2 or 3 straight pitches, as Tom Grieve told us. And one more pitch, and Billy Martin was going to go and have a chat with him out in center field. And Tom said, "Ooh, that would have been awesome."
Yes.
Oh, that'd have been amazing.
Right?
But does he make it to center field, though? Wouldn't the shortstop or second baseman maybe say, "Hey, what's going on?" Or do they just go, "Hey, go tangle with him. We don't care."
I mean, he was insane. So maybe someone would, get in front of him, but I doubt it.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Score a bogey for Beeman. This is Dean Beeman, the commissioner of the PGA, and he's canceled the Tournament of Champions, and then he uncanceled it. Now, that was 50 years ago. Now the Tournament of Champions is called the Century, and it's the first tournament of the season in January at the Kapalua Resort in Maui. Players didn't want it canceled. They liked the tournament. Why not cancel Christmas too, said golfer Jerry McGee. The real reason Beeman wanted it canceled, do you guys know why?
Why?
Because of the location, La Costa. the country club in Carlsbad, California, about 100 miles south of LA. And it seemed like the underworld, the mafia, was starting to hang out there. And the PGA was like, we don't want to be associated with this. And so they wanted to get out at any cost, basically. And that was the reason for Beeman, at least for a bit, saying no more. As it turns out, they stayed at La Costa until 1999 before
Wow.
they moved on to Maui. So crazy times in the PGA.
They also, what is it? One part of the article said that the La Costa Country Club, it resembles a small town girl with a besmirched reputation. Everyone whispers behind her back, even if they've never dated her. The resort features 57 varieties of saunas, massages, and buffet tables, and has long attracted a stylish clientele. I'm not sure what that means, but maybe Mark can tell me. They just dress nicely.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's
That's
exactly
it. That's it. They're in 100% cotton Dockers. That's it.
it.
Well, the Flyers did it. They repeated as Cup champions, and surprisingly, they did it without fighting. Just 2 fights for the Broad Street Bullies in the 6-game series. So they could obviously do more than just beat the crap out of people. I love this quote from one of the Flyers' 5 centers that were given the task to try to slow down. Billy, help me with this pronunciation. Gilbert Perreault?
Gilbert.
Gilbert
Gilbert Perreault. Yeah.
the Hall of Famer and leader of the Sabres' vaunted French connection. When people think of hockey, he said, they think of everything being graceful and flowing. The Flying Frenchman, the French connection, all that. Then we came along. They used to call us goons because we weren't very fancy, but now they have no excuses, none, because there was no, and I love this, there was no gooning in these playoffs. Or put it this way, the point we proved is that a working man's hockey team can win. Terry Crisp, Flyers center, back-to-back champions, Stanley Cup championships for the Philadelphia Flyers.
Yeah, you got to mention that you mentioned all our other guests. Bernie Perron was the
Yeah.
MVP for the 2nd straight year. He was our guest on our show last year.
That's right.
All I can say
All
is
that.
très bien.
That's right. That's right.
Very good. Nice. Next up, the cover of the June 9th, 1975 issue of Sports Illustrated, Rocky Bleier's War, written by Bleier and Terry O'Neill. This is about the Steelers' Rocky Bleier and his time spent in the Vietnam War. Now, as we mentioned already, we had Rocky on last fall, talked quite a bit about him going from being drafted by the Steelers to being drafted by the Army. Very long article. Anything in particular jump out at you, either of you? Mark, you go first.
Well, I just want to talk in general about the Vietnam War because I was a kid, but I was completely aware of what was going on. I mean, in the late 60s, early 70s, I would see reports on the news, from there, and I was completely aware of what was going on. They were fighting a war here. I lived in Chicago when they had the protests at the Democratic Convention, when they had the rioting. So it was sort of a personal thing to me. I didn't quite understand it all because, when I started realizing there was a war being fought in Vietnam involving our servicemen, I was like 7. And when the war finally ended, I was like just hitting my teens, like 13, 14. So, but it was like a personal experience, and to see Walter Cronkite, tossing to Dan Rather, who's doing a report from Vietnam. It was just, it's the first war that was really brought into the living room. In World War II, you get radio reports, and Edouard Murrow became famous for his radio reports, but it wasn't visual. And the Korean War, not so much either. The Vietnam War was the first war where people at home could see our soldiers there and see them fighting and see the conditions they were in.
Yeah, and it might be
I didn't have
the
that.
reason we don't win wars anymore because people don't really want to know what's going on.
Yeah.
They're fine with this, like, oh, okay, we handled Germany. Don't
Yeah.
really want to know how, but we did it. And once it started becoming more known as to how some of these atrocities happen, our success rate in fighting wars dropped dramatically. Anything jump out at you, Billy?
Oh, just did. When I read his article, which is, very graphic and very emotional, that it reminded me of the movie Platoon. So I thought, well, when did Rocky Bleier's book come out? It came out in 75. and Platoon was 86. And it literally, if you just in certain parts of the article, I can picture the parts in Platoon that he would have been talking about. I mean, it sort of fits that whole scenario of that movie and what it was like back in the day. Now you realize why that movie won an Academy Award in terms of its real life look at Vietnam. But all I thought was, man, if that's what it was like, I mean, that movie is so much more impactful to me now just because of that, reading what Rocky Bleier said, because he lived it. Some of the things he talked about, the fact that he even made it out of there, getting injured twice, that he lost his bag. I mean, I don't know how he survived it.
Well, Oliver Stone says basically was in Vietnam. He fought in there, and he says he wrote Platoon based on his own experiences. He was
Yeah.
there from 67 to 68 as infantryman, and he was wounded a couple times. So, but there are elements from the Rocky Bleier one that seem the same too. So,
Yeah.
I'm sure Stone, most of it came from his personal
No
experience.
question.
But I can't believe that, reading, about Bleier and stuff, that some of the stuff could have bled in there too.
Because what you just said, there's a part where they said there was a search and destroy, where
Yeah.
the commanders would say, you just go out to these little, lily pads and just kill everybody. And that's what they did in Platoon. And that's what Rocky Bleier talked about specifically in that article. So it sort of plays, and I'm not saying that Oliver Stone didn't have to do the same thing. I'm just saying his book really made it look like the movie Platoon and how real it truly was.
Yeah, I mean, more than likely, they just had some shared experiences.
Yes.
Rather than us tell you what this article said, here's a clip of our interview with Rocky Bleier from last September on the Past Our Prime podcast as he recounts his time spent in a far-off land.
We've been in country about 4.5 months in August. Now there was a movement going on. There was a Vietnamese regiment that was moving down from North Vietnam into our area. Intelligence had them coming down this way, and so we were part of a retaining force with the Marines pushing them down from the north, and we were in the south to be able to retain them. That was the plan, as I had found out years later. But so when you're just when you get as a private, I was a grenadier. I carried a M79 grenade launcher, and my responsibility was to get firepower on distant places. So, I could 100 to 150 meters away, I could lob grenades inward. So all of a sudden, there was a sister company that got hit. We came in to help them get out of the hot spot. In so doing, we're helping the wounded and carrying the dead out at that moment in time. 2 days later, we now have to go back, and we're on an open rice paddy and walking out on an open rice paddy. And I was probably fourth or fifth in line at the time. And our point man was maybe 40 yards in front of me. All of a sudden saw movement on the berm, and he hollers, "Gook, gook." And shots break the stillness. They started to run, and he started chasing them, pulling everybody out of the middle of the rice paddy, when all of a sudden a machine gun started to level the area, and you could just hear the rapid firing going across. And so we all dove into dried up rice paddies that gave us some protection, a little bit, but not much. I rolled over my side. I saw where the machine gun was nestled up in the hillside. My responsibility, because I'm carrying that M79 grenade launcher, was to get firepower on that position. So I rolled over my side, breached a grenade, when all of a sudden I felt a thud in my left leg, and it started to burn and bled, and I was hit for the first time that day. Continued to discharge my rounds until we could silence that machine gun position, drop back behind some protection, and the the North Vietnamese moved in into our position, and all of a sudden there was an open fire when I saw a grenade come flying through the air, and it hit my commanding officer right in the middle of the back, and it bounced off and rolled between my feet, and before I could jump out of the way, it blew up through the lower part of my legs. And again, we were in another firefight until sister platoon fought its way down and finally dragged us out of there. We got to a secured area, then helicopters came in, took us to an aid station, then to Da Nang where we got patched up, and then I ultimately flew to Tokyo where I spent 3 weeks in the hospital before I came back to the States, where I spent 9 months in the hospital, went through 3 more operations during that period of time.
Rocky would come back, he would battle and fight and use that spirit he has to get healthy and make the Steelers again. And he would go on to win not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 Super Bowls with the Steelers. And not just a bit player either. You know, I mean, he was an integral part of that Steelers offense. He could do a little bit of everything. Truly remarkable tale about a remarkable man. But it got me to thinking, did anyone go from the NFL to Vietnam and not come back? And the answer is yes, one person. His name is Bob Kalsu. He was an All-American tackle at Oklahoma, was drafted by the Buffalo Bills in the 8th round, but made the team. Not only make the team, he excelled, was named the top rookie for the Bills in 1968. But at season's end, he made it clear that he intended to honor his commitment he made in college in the ROTC program and serve his country. And that's what he did. Despite being married with a young daughter at home and another child on the way, Bob put his football career and his personal life on hold and headed for Vietnam, and he never came home. He died in a blast on July 21st, 1970, the only active NFL player to die in service of his country in that war, and the last one until Pat Tillman died in Afghanistan in 2004. Joining us now on the Past Our Prime podcast, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce her to everyone, is the widow of Bob Kalsu, Jan Kalsu. Jan, it's an honor to talk with you today, and we thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you. I am proud to talk about Bob's life.
Great. We'll be as gentle as we can. I know you were up very late last night watching the Thunder advance to the NBA Finals, so I hope you were able to sleep in a little bit today.
I did sleep in.
Good. Jan, Bob would have turned 80 years old this past April, but instead he will be 25 for eternity. Tell me and tell us about the 25-year-old version of Bob Kalsu. We know he was a football player. We know he was a soldier, but what was he like as a man and as a husband?
He was full of life and loved. I have 4 brothers and 4 sisters, so he was an only child, so he was so excited to be incorporated into our family, and he was always doing something, throwing the football with the boys out in the yard, and then just, he was just a vivacious person and a laugh that he would have just a very gregarious laugh. He was a very good person.
After Bob's time at the University of Oklahoma was over, where he was an All-American, he gets drafted by the Buffalo Bills. And there you are now in New York, far from home, freezing, I might add, married to an NFL player. And Bob is named the Bills' Rookie of the Year as a lineman, no less. How is life for the Kalsu family in 1968?
Well, to be honest with you, we got married in January of '68, and of course, being Catholic, I guess we were open to life, and we were pregnant right away. And so a lot of his away games were about the time I was due to have our baby. And so I came back home for her birth, and and then he didn't. I don't think he saw Jill for a month. Actually, the crazy thing about it, he didn't see Jill because of football, and didn't see his son because he had died.
That is definitely crazy.
Oh, so the season ends with the Bills, and a lot of guys, a lot of players, they always have to go out and get other jobs. They take time off to rest their bodies. What did Bob go to? What did he end up? He ended up obviously going into the service where he had promised he was going to go to. Tell me about that and how you felt.
Well, it's I guess it was not anything how I felt. It was that I took on his feelings of, this is what I'm to do. He did a ROTC in college, and from there he at many of the, back then with the draft and everything, many of the pro football players had options to sign out of being available for service, but he was not like that. He said he signed the contract when he did ROTC to serve 2 years in the military, and he was honest to his word. So from there, he got home, and Jill was born in November. He got home after his last game in December, and we weren't. He told the football organization what we were going to do. They weren't thrilled about it. Tried to talk him out of it, and like I said, he was wanted to do what he was committed to do. So our first stint was at Fort Sill in Oklahoma in artillery, and then from there he got orders for Vietnam, and that's how it. I will tell you too that when I found out he was going to Vietnam, being Catholic, I knelt before the tabernacle and I asked God, if you feel like you need Bob more than I do, that at least give us a son to carry on his name. Kalsu is a Czech name, and any of the Kalsus in the United States are all related. It was spelled differently, but a teacher changed it for the ease of, I guess, America. And so I wanted his name to be carried on. And so following through, when Bob was killed, Bobby was born, and in earth, talking this way, he didn't know about the birth of his son, but in eternal, he did. So anyway, I was told in the hospital by a soldier that my husband had died.
That is just so much to go through for you. When he leaves, you're basically become a single mom. That day
Right.
that he ended up leaving, how tough was it for you to say goodbye, not knowing anything was going to happen, but how tough was it for you to be able to say goodbye to him?
I remember Jill was a year old, 12 months old. And when we took him to the airport, I think that was the most, I don't mean to say this in an ignorant way, but that was the most passionate kiss from him of goodbye. And, it was hard. Of course, I took care of our daughter and of course, being pregnant besides. Mm-hmm. I took her on he loved his daughter. And so I took, when it was R&R time, I took her to Hawaii with me because I wanted our family to be complete. Now, back then, I had to get a letter from my doctor to say I could fly to Hawaii being 7 months pregnant. And so got that. And so Jill and I went to Hawaii. And I'll never forget the joy in his face when they first of all, they put you on when you get to the place where they want you to meet, they talk to the family and tell them, do not bring up anything. These men have been through hell. Do not bring up anything that is stressful to them. Give them, let them rest. And that's the first thing that they tell all the family that are waiting for their loved ones. And so then we wait outside for buses to arrive and the military that are coming out for the R&R. And when Bob came out of the bus, I was holding Jill, and he was so excited. He was like, I can't, when you get someone that big, he came galloping towards us. It was like a gallop, he came running towards us. And it scared Jill because he comes running and you can see the big lump in his throat as he's hugging us. And then when Jill's surprised because she does, it's been 6 months that she's, a little child for, not that they forget, but they forget. And she quickly remembered him afterwards. And we had a wonderful time. And I will say that I got a little taste of what he was going through because he was exhausted. It was like he finally could sleep without being worried. And I had a bottle of bubbles to amuse Jill, and he's sound asleep on the bed, and I'm laying there with Jill and blowing bubbles to her to keep her quiet while her daddy sleeps. And then someone, for some reason, outside the hotel shoots off a round of black cats. And I can't tell you, my face was just, my shock on my face as Bob, out of a sound sleep, is darting for cover. He thinks he's back in Vietnam. And that was my taste of what it was like for him to be there.
So that was the last time you actually saw Bob at that meeting?
It was. And when they put me on, they took you by trolley out to the plane, and he was out there by the trolley. You've got to realize how many years ago this was, and he was on the tarmac where the trolley was, and I happened to be in the last seat of the trolley, and he's back there and he's holding my hand as I'm on the trolley, and I said, "Please be careful, Bob." And the last words I heard from him was, "No, you be careful. You're giving birth to our baby." So, that's the last time, But I feel God's answer to my prayer when Bobby was born.
So you're in the hospital waiting to deliver Bobby and from Junior.
No, actually, I was supposed to stay with my parents, and there are still my younger siblings still in the home, and so they're there to watch Jill. And my father, who was a doctor, I was having contractions, but they were really close. And my father, being a doctor, he thought, "Oh, good Lord, I'm going to, be delivering this baby." But he got me to the hospital, and within an hour, I had Bobby. And the next morning, I'm so excited. It's a little boy, and back then we didn't have ultrasounds. Back then we didn't have communications where I could contact him other than by letter. And so there was no way to get, the communications were bad, and so I'm trying to think. When I had Bobby at 12:45 a.m. on the 23rd, that morning, my doctor came into my room. I was rooming with another person, and they asked the husband and wife, and he had just brought her flowers, and asked them if they could leave the room for a little bit. And so then Dr. McGuire came in, and I'm kind of sitting in bed, and he puts his arm around me, and he said, "Jan, a soldier's going to be coming in to talk to you." And I said, "Bob has been killed, hasn't he?" And and then I went to, it was kind of like I don't know if it's shock or what, but I remember going through, because Bob and I shared the same faith. We shared the same ideals of life. And so I went, when he said that, I started going, Bob would want us to raise our children strong in our faith. He would want them to be strong in their character. I'm going down all this list just in my own mind. And then a nurse came in, and Dr. McGuire nodded to her that the soldier could come in. And so the soldier came in, and he, I guess, had been aware of the situation, and he's got tears in his eyes. He's got tears rolling down his face, and he just says, that I'm sorry to tell you that your husband, James Robert Kalsu, has been killed in Vietnam. And I just said, being that my father was a doctor, back then it's a little bit more, they were a little bit more careful about staying longer in the hospital after you have a baby, And I just told, doctor, I said, Dr. McGuire, I want to go home. And so and I also had named, Bob and I had decided on the name Robert Todd if we had a boy. We didn't, like I said, we didn't have ultrasounds or anything to tell them. So he didn't know. But we were going to name him Robert, either Robert Kevin or Robert Todd. It's been years. And, but when I just asked the Dr. McGuire to please, will you get the statistician for me? Because that's the name we had put down. And so then I had him change it to Bob's name completely. And then my sister and her husband came to pick me up, and we went home, and then the shock and the grief is kind of hit me. I was kind of, in shock for a little while, and then the grief, and then we didn't know. I can't tell you how long it was before they brought Bob's body back, and the soldiers and they at the funeral home they asked if we wanted to go and view his body, and I just couldn't. I just had a baby. I just couldn't see my precious husband with no life in him. And I said, I can't. And the same way that Mr. and Mrs. Kalsu, they didn't have the strength to do it either. And so Bob's uncle, who was not that much older than Bob, said he would go do it. And when he went, this is what Milt tells us, that he couldn't tell it was Bob because his head was completely wrapped in gauze. So he it was a head wound. And so he did, he wanted to make sure it was Bob. So he asked them, he knew that Bob, when, I don't know how young you all are, but when we were young, if someone stuck you with a pencil, you had the lead. And the lead, kind of like a tattoo, but it's from the lead. And so Uncle Milt knew that Bob had that on the top of one of his hands. So he asked them to remove the glove, and they removed the glove, and he saw the wound, the pencil lead. The sad thing about it, I feel, is the dignity is they didn't wash his body, because Milt said his fingernails were all full of dirt. And that made me sad. That I guess the funeral home just leaves his body the way it is, since they've already put him in uniform. But anyway, it makes me sad, but I know his soul is with God. But those are things that I remember. Anyway.
I would imagine when there is a tragedy like this, the fact that now you have two kids can be a source of strength for you. And I imagine
it was that they were the reason I could live on, and I did raise them to be very, very upstanding adults. very, very upstanding in their morals and their Catholic faith, and their children. They've raised their children the same way. And I wouldn't be a bit surprised if Bob didn't have a part in helping raise them.
Hmm.
You know, we don't know what eternal life is like. You know, what the ability is for them. So, but they're very wonderful adults with wonderful children.
We are talking with Jan Kalsu, the widow of Bob Kalsu, who was killed in Vietnam in July of 1970. I would be remiss, Jan, if I didn't also mention that Bob's dear friend, Sergeant David Earl Johnson, also was killed by the blast. It must make you so proud to hear. I've seen a few videos when it came to Bob's life, and see all these soldiers talk so proudly about Bob the man and how he carried himself over there. And you speak of his character, but the fact that he was friends with David Earl Johnson, a black man, you know, in the 70s, we were still in that weird time here in the country. How proud are you to this day of who Bob Kalsu was?
You know, I think of David many, many times, and how Bob, it was the officer of the Hill was killed before Bob, so that made Bob the officer of the Hill. And they said that Bob was, the men had told me that Bob was unlike any other officer they ever had, because he never put himself above them and made them go in harm's way to get things that he needed. He would do it himself. And the same way with his relationship with David, because David was a big, young, strapping man, just like Bob was, but he came from a poor area in Arkansas. And I really believe if David would have had the same chances that Bob did, you know, he probably could have played sports, but he was in a very small town. But anyway, David and Bob, they both loved to play cards. They played cards together, and then when Bob knew he was getting close to having to come back to the States, he knew they for a long time did not even know Bob played pro football, but he knew he had to get in shape, and so he and David would go down. When the helicopters would drop the ammunition down, they do it at the base of the hill, and the men would have to go down and bring the ammunition back up. And David and Bob would compete with each other on how many they could carry, and they had a really wonderful relationship. And to think that they died together.
You know, you mentioned that you had eight siblings, but that Bob was an only child. And I read where Barry Switzer said at the funeral, Barry Switzer, the legendary Oklahoma Sooners coach, that Bob's father, after everyone had left, went and lay down on Bob's casket. Obviously, the loss is great for everyone, but you have this support system, whereas your in-laws, that was their only son. How tough was this for them to have to deal with?
Very tough, and very we were very bonded together as a family. And if they worked over our house, and they did, you know, I took the children. I was, you know, staying with my parents, but I knew if I didn't get out of their house, I would rely on them all the time. So I took my children, one in a carrier and one by her little hand, and went looking for an apartment. Back then, it's crazy, but the apartments, some of them would restrict not having children at their apartments. So I'd have to go around and find an apartment. So I lived there a year in an apartment, and then by the grace of God, this home was a man he was an oil man that he was over in the Middle East. And I begged him. I wrote him a letter and says, you know, told him I would never be able to get a house on my own. Could I please buy this house that I was renting at the time from him? And so he let me. And so we lived in that house. So, but it had a yard. And with two little children, Mr. Kalsu would come over and mow the lawn. Mrs. Kalsu would come over and help with the wash. And back then, it wasn't convenient. My washer dryer were out in the garage. So, even the wintertime. But I love them. They were like parents to me and wonderful grandparents. And if they weren't over my house, we were at their house every Sunday. And I remember my mom telling me, she said, I don't ever see you as much. And just because I was trying to make up for them not having their son anymore. And I just said, Mom, I said, the children are the only, they're the only ones that Grandpa and Grandma have left, Leah and Frank. And she understood that. And, but we were very close, very close.
Jan, it's crazy to think nowadays that if I want to call a friend of mine anywhere in the world, I can pick up and do that. And you talked about that you guys just exchange letters. Do you still have all those letters? And do you go through them and try to relive those days and picture your wonderful husband?
No, I don't. I have those letters and I have them in a trunk, and I can't, it just hurts too much. So it will be up to the children after God takes me to go through the letters if they want. I can't do it.
And then by talking about your children, what do you see? Do you see Bob in them? I'm not talking physically, but do you sometimes when you're with them see some parts of them that remind you of your husband? Because I know I have a daughter and I see myself and my wife in her all the time.
Right. And I do. And I do. And like I told you, Bob and I were very much alike in our beliefs and in our morals. So what I see in them is what I would see that Bob and I would have done if he were here.
How did you and Bob first meet, and what was your first impressions of him?
I'll tell you this is a strange story, but we had a big rivalry with the Texas football, and my girlfriend and I were just getting a Coke, and you're talking about 1968, so there's a big difference in what you do, like go get a Coke. That was the thing that kids did, teenagers did, and so I was a freshman at college, and Debbie and I were going to get a Coke, and then on the radio it said that the Oklahoma Sooners were coming home and go out to the airport to cheer them on. Now, it's not the airports weren't as sterile as they are now as far as being able to, they were completely different. And so we were able to go out in the tarmac with the plane. I'm sure it wasn't parked around the other airplanes, and they're coming, and the crowd just surges out there to the tarmac. And we were all applauding, and I see this one of the players that comes off. I thought, well, I know him. That's Ron. We grew up from grade school on. He was a couple of years older. He had a brother in my class, and he was my sister's class. And so I go running over there, and I said, Ron, I didn't know you played football. And I said, these guys are nice looking, Ron. And he says, well, Jan, pick one out and I'll fix you up with him. And so I said, really? And so teasingly, so the buses had to leave. And so Ron says, he just said, well, I'll fix you up with someone, Jan. And I didn't think anything about it. And back then, this is another strange thing. Back then, telephones were different too, because there was long distance even between towns that we were at. Like Bob lived in Norman, and I was going to school in Edmond, which are not far from each other. But at that day and age, it was long distance. But anyway, I guess Ron because he knew our family all, while we were growing up, he called my family's, my father and mother's phone, and got my telephone at the college. And we met. I mean, he called me and he said, Jan, would you like to go out double date with me and I knew the girl too, with my roommate? And I said, sure. And I said, what's his name? And he said, Bob Kalsu. Well, I'm tall, and I was 5'8". And he said, I said, what's his name? And he said, Bob Kalsu. Well, being tall, I said, Bob, is he Asian? Because all I could think of that last name, all I could think of is, I'm going to be a lot taller than this guy. And I didn't realize, of course, I should have realized, Bob is sitting right next to him listening to all this. listening, and so anyway, it ended up that Kalsu is a Czech name, and his grandparents came over from Czechoslovakia, and then his mother's from more French from Louisiana. But anyway, I would hear when I was dating Bob, I would go to his house, and his father would be talking to him on the telephone with his parents, and they're speaking Czech, and Bob's mother would talk to her mother in French. And I would say to Bob, I said, "Are they?" Now neither one of them had accents of that, they were, but they knew the language of their parents. And I would say to Bob, we're sitting in the family room. I said, Bob, do you think they're talking about me? And he goes, heck, I don't know. But anyway, it was just, it was a wonderful short time in my life that I hold dear to my heart.
Was it like love at first sight for you? I mean,
yes, it was. Yes, it was. And I went to a college boarding school, college preparatory school. So I didn't really date. I dated friends, yes, but not, just going out. So when I met Bob, it was love at first sight, but I'm thinking, oh, wait a second. I haven't even really had a chance to date. But it ended up that, I thought, I couldn't find anybody more wonderful than he is, and his character and everything. And so we dated, and then we decided we were going to get married, and if they won the Kansas game, I remember that year. I think it was Kansas State. I can't remember that. And I was up on row 66. And if they won that Kansas game, that meant they were going to go to the Orange Bowl. And so they won that game. And I was in, again, we're talking about a year that they don't do these things anymore. But I flew down those stairs and opened up the door to the field and ran in Bob's arms, and he's picked me up and twirling me around because now we can choose a date to get married. And we decided, silly kids, but we decided, okay, this is great. We'll just use the Orange Bowl as a honeymoon until Coach Fairbanks got wind of it. And he says, that's not going to happen. And so they went to the Orange Bowl. We got married later on that month, but I watched the Orange Bowl on TV instead of in Florida. And Coach Fairbanks and I laughed about that situation. We both had to speak about Bob at something that we went to, and so the day before we're laughing and talking at a dinner place and reminiscing about when he did that to us, and he's laughing. And God rest his soul, he's passed away of brain cancer.
I was going to just mention, because you're talking about that Orange Bowl, and there's video on YouTube where the Orange Bowl game between Oklahoma and I believe Tennessee, and they're introducing like the starting players, which they used to do. And there
Uh-huh.
is your husband. They introduce him and he runs up into the screen and you see him, a handsome big dude.
Uh-huh.
Uh, and it's if you go on YouTube, you'll see it. Because back then they would do that. They don't do that anymore in college football. But it was a really nice shot of your husband being introduced.
He was very handsome, and very, when he would come to my college to go out with me, we'd go to the student union, and it was amazing. I didn't know how brazen other girls could be about wanting to get close to him. And I was kind of taken back because, here I'd been in boarding school, and I was kind of taken back by how forward they could be and try to make themselves attractive to him as they would come up to our table to ask for salt. But they would never look at me when they were asking for salt, and they had salt at their table already.
Jan, on the 23rd of July, 2001, 50 days before 9/11, Sports Illustrated had Bob Kalsu on its cover. What was that like for you and the family to have that great magazine pay tribute and tell the Bob Kalsu story back almost 25 years ago?
Something I never, ever imagined would happen. And I was very, very proud that they would honor him, as soldier, but an athlete. He was an athlete that could have gone far, and actually, I will tell you that when Bob was he would go to one of the stopping points with like Dallas and Denver. I know those two for sure was the ROTC program that Bob was in, and so Buffalo was the only one that were brave enough to take him on, because they didn't want to. The other teams didn't want to have to worry about a guy that was in ROTC, and I'm sure Bob was asked about that, and he wasn't about to sign away his what he was supposed to do as far as service to his country. So, but Buffalo was a wonderful opportunity. It was a wonderful place. God gives you crosses, and you either pick them up and go on, or you make life miserable. And I had two children I wanted to raise as not only God, but Bob would want me to. And I feel like when I see Bob again, that he can say, "Well done, Jan," to me, but recently I was thinking, oh dear God in heaven, Bob's going to be 25 years old, and I'll be this old lady, and I thought, oh no, that's not true. We go in spirit, so he wants to see what I look like first.
That's going to be tough for us.
Oh my goodness.
Jan, you talked a little bit about him with the Buffalo Bills and his wonderful rookie season. Are you still a Bills fan, and do you watch their games, and does that bring back?
Oh yes, those poor guys. Are they going to ever win before I die? I'm waiting. I'm 77 years old. I'm patiently waiting for and I love the Bills, and I love their organization, and they were wonderful to us. They flew us up there several times, and I'm still in contact with the golly, my age is forgetting. The former Bills owner's widow,
Wilson,
and told me that, yes, Ralph Wilson, and Mary Wilson, and she still has one of those rooms up there at the tells us anytime we want to go up there, it's just let her know and we could stay in their suite, her suite. But they're just the nicest people. The nicest. I can't say enough about how they may not win the games, but they're nice people.
So we do a trivia segment on this show. It's called 50-50. I'm going to ask you a trivia question. You got a 50% chance of getting it correct. True or false.
Oh, don't do it. Scores.
I won't do scores, I promise. But we're going to tie it in to Bob's rookie year with the Buffalo Bills. So that 1968 Bills team was not very good. In fact, they were so bad, I think they got the #1 pick in the draft, which led to O.J. Simpson being drafted. But that 68 team went 12-1. So here's your trivia question. The only win they got that year was against the eventual Super Bowl champions.
Uh-huh. New York Jets?
Yep. True or false?
Yes, that was true.
You are absolutely correct. They beat in late September Joe Namath and the New York Jets for their only win of the year. And then the Jets went on to win Super Bowl III.
Isn't that something?
Yeah.
It's just really a sad situation. I was at that game.
Oh, you were? Oh, okay. Yeah, because they had a big lead and they had to hold on, right?
I don't remember. I think my brother, my sister, and her husband at the time lived in Akron, Ohio. So they drove up with the game and they sat with me.
Because tying into that, were you there, I guess, in April 13th of 2000 when Bob would have been 55? The Bills added him to their wall of fame. The picture. Were you at that ceremony? Do you remember?
Oh, yes. They had us out in the field and I had to talk to the crowd. And it was very nice. I will tell you something. I had met OJ before when I came up, and terrible thing is I can remember his name, but I can't remember the quarterback back that when Bob played, he was quarterback. Jack Kemp.
Oh yeah.
And Jack and Jane Kemp, they were very nice when I came up. I came up for it was some kind of reunion of the players, and it was emotional to me, but I came. And I remember having my camera to take pictures when they all went out on the field and walked around the field as they were introduced. And my camera, I'm pretending like I'm taking pictures, but tears are just running down my face because Bob's not with them, and I get choked up. And his number was 61, and if you look at that 6 is the way that they did it. The 6 is not closed off to where it looks like GI.
Oh wow.
And it really is a beautiful thing to see.
I want to end something fun because this is just so amazing, this interview with you. But I read a lot about Bob, that he had an amazing sense of humor. Can you give us some examples of that sense of humor?
No. Oh no. You just had a good sense of humor. Not any one thing, but
much like funny. You, he just liked to laugh.
Oh my gosh, yes, we had more fun. It's just and he loved having brothers and sisters finally with his my siblings, and of course there was one joke after another, the family. And one time he was playing football. My little brother, I hope he doesn't hear this interview. He'd be frustrated with me, but one of my little brothers, they were tossing footballs, and Jeff got mad at a situation, a throw or like that he didn't catch it, just like that. And he said a bad word, and Bob picked him up with one hand, put him up in the fork of the tree, and said, "You're not coming down until you're going to talk like that." and, uh, and so he was funny. He was funny, and so but he was funny, but he had moral character.
Before there was Pat Tillman, there was Bob Kalsu, the only professional football player killed in Vietnam. I can honestly say, Jan, that of all the guests we've had on our show, Bob is the one I would have liked to have shaken his hand more than anyone else. A true American hero. I salute you and all the Kalsu family. I speak on behalf of Bill and Mark when I say thank you so much for coming on our show and sharing yours and Bob's story. It was, I was really set for it to be sad, and it was, but your laugh just is so inspiring. The fact that you had a nice life. You're surrounded by 2 children and 9 grandchildren. You're an inspiration, Jan. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're sure welcome, and thanks for having me on. And
Thank you, Jan.
one thing I want to say is Bob represents all the soldiers that fought with him. He happened to be a pro football player, but every one of those young soldiers are to be saluted. And I got to meet almost all of them at a reunion on Fire Base Ripcord. They have the Screaming Eagles, Fort Campbell, has a room named after Bob there, the reception room. And but that's where I was able to meet him, and wonderful young men. So and Bob was, he was 25, and a lot of them were probably 18, and but when Bob is honored, I want to be able to honor all the men that fought with him, because it's a horrible, horrible situation that no one should ever have to face in their lifetime. And they're wonderful men, and wonderful men to have to live it in their mind all the time. And so in your honoring Bob, I want to honor all the men that were with him.
Amen. Thank you so much, Jan.
Thank you, Jan.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Enjoy the NBA Finals.
I will.
Sometimes we've had Hall of Famers like Jim Cott on the show. Sometimes it's great writers like Curry Kirkpatrick of Sports Illustrated. Sometimes it's great players who have great stories to tell like Rocky Bleier. And sometimes it's just a normal woman from Oklahoma who had her life torn apart half a world away when her young husband and father of her 2 kids is killed in a war. And I tell you, Jan Kalsu, words can't express our respect and admiration for you for coming on the show. That was a tough interview to do, guys. We like to have fun on the show, and you want to show respect. And I really thought she was great because she laughed and laughed and laughed, but it was not an easy interview for us to conduct.
No, and it's hard memories for her, but I think it's cathartic for her. She needs to share it and tell everybody about the person and what he was like, and what Bob was and what he stood for. So I think it's really important for her. And I think the other thing was the fact that she says, the fact that they had the 2 kids allowed her to move forward. Without the 2 kids, who knows what happens?
Yeah, and I thought we all handled it really well, just because we did talk about the very tough parts of what he went through and what she went through, but then we brought it back to just how much of a good man he was and how much fun he could be. And it was great at the end. You're right, when she was laughing about the Buffalo Bills, or a sense of humor, just that ability to do that, to me, made the interview just perfect. But when you hear what she's saying, that she lost her husband with children in a situation that she had no ability to know what was even going on. It was just, there were points there. I just, it's hard not to be emotional with that.
No question. For the record, Mark, start us off.
Okay, I'm going to talk about Ezra Charles, who passed away at the age of 53. He was known as the Cincinnati Cobra. He was the heavyweight champion of the world from 1949 to 51. He successfully defended his title 8 times. He's in the International Boxing Hall of Fame. And he started off as a welterweight and he worked his way up. And then he becomes a middleweight, then a light heavyweight, then a heavyweight. And one of the great unknown fighters, or not one that's like on the tips of everyone's list. People might know Joe Louis and Rocky Marciano, people from those days. Not many know about Ezra Charles, but he was a force.
Yeah, and to add on to what Mark said, Charles is, you mentioned Rocky Marciano. Charles is the only man ever to last the full 15-round distance against Marciano. Um, they also, it said he landed a severe blow that actually split Marciano's nose in half. Marciano's cornermen were unable to stop the bleeding, and the referee almost halted the contest until Marciano rallied with an 8th-round knockout.
That's
So
great.
Charles came close to, giving Marciano his only loss.
Wow, that is a great. Good job, guys. Nice. I got one. Ruffian. Can't get enough of her, right? Ridden by Jacinto Vasquez in the saddle, won the Mother Goose at Aqueduct in a stakes record 147 over Sweet Old Girl for her 9th straight win by 13.5 lengths. So she was a woman among boys, that's for sure. The great Ruffian.
It would be awesome if maybe we get the jockey on one day. That'd be just amazing.
That would have been nice. And this issue is, I think that's our 5th former guest mentioned in this issue. That's great. Faces in the crowd. Bill.
Kathy McMillan. She was a high school junior in North Carolina. She set many long jump records back in 75. She also qualified for the 1980 U.S. Olympic team, but like a lot of the people we've talked about in these issues, she couldn't go because of the Olympic boycott.
Boy, that still hurts 45 years later.
All that training and nothing. She got them gold, like a gold medal or a medal that they gave her from the White House for, making the team.
Right. It's not the same.
No.
Faces in the crowd for you, Mark.
Well, I have one. He's not like someone that, all of a sudden becomes like this, oh, look at this 17-year-old kid and he became, this Hall of Fame player. But it's always neat to do these like smaller things. And this is a guy named Wilson Gibbons, who was 18 at the time, from Huntington, West Virginia. He's like the champion. Three straight years in a row, he won the state high school chess competition. And so you wonder, like, what happens to someone like that, And the man's still alive. He's been playing tournament chess for over 50 years. He was also the 3-time Oregon senior champion, a 3-time Minnesota senior champion, a 3-time West Virginia high school champion. So a guy who his whole life, dedicated to chess, and he's the current president of the Oregon Chess Federation.
Wow.
So here's to you, Wilson Gibbons.
Absolutely. And I would say that for some reason, chess is, for a board game, is incredibly overrepresented in TV and film.
Yes. Yes.
There are a lot of chess movies. And, I liked a bunch of
the Bobby Fischer one.
The Gambit. The Queen's Gambit.
Queen's Gambit is great.
Yeah.
But it's like for finding Bobby Fischer or something.
Right. That's right.
Searching for Bobby Fischer.
Yes, searching for Bobby Fischer.
They found him.
They did.
Yeah. Chess was the only, for me, being somewhat hyperactive, chess was the one thing that could calm me down when I was a kid.
Really?
So I played a guy that was in medical school, and it took us like a week to finish it.
Yeah.
No, but
I could focus. I could focus my mind on that. So we played at his house one day, or his parents' house, and we'd come back every day and play like an hour. He beat me, but it took a long time because I knew how to play. And for one reason, I could logically see moves on a chessboard, but in the rest of part of my life, I was, but on chess.
Well, I knew the moves, but I didn't know the strategy.
Right.
So, right. You remember our house guest, Julian, I played him once in chess. He beat me, I think, in 4 moves, was it?
Wow.
Yeah,
because it is, Mark. It is. Yeah, because we obviously didn't. When I played the guy, we weren't that great. But I mean, I'm telling you, there is so much strategy to it.
Right.
Let's finish up. 19th hole. You got another one, Bill?
I do. Mike Arbach. He writes, John Underwood did a masterful job of portraying athletics at MIT. One small item was overlooked, however. No matter how good his grades, a student cannot graduate from MIT unless he can swim 100 yards.
Hmm.
Who knew?
Who knew? You
Who
know,
knew that?
they implemented, I think our class was the first class at South Pass High School where we had to pass a swimming class in order to graduate.
Wow.
Yeah.
Really?
Yep. Yep.
Wow.
Hey, once again, want to thank Jan Kalsu for coming on and talking about her husband, Bob Kalsu, killed in action 55 years ago next month. Glad she shared her and Bob's story. He is someone worth remembering. Next week, the Ryan Express. Can't get enough about Nolan Ryan from 50 years ago. For a while, he was the only reason to watch Angels baseball.
Well, some people say he might be the only reason nowadays. He's not even pitching.
Just go on YouTube and watch this old
just
stuff.
watch him face the Yankees and throw a one-hitter. Yeah, there you go.
That's next week. Until then, Mark and Bill say sayonara.
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 That's not a question.
Yeah. Mark had no enthusiasm whatsoever.
He really didn't. For Mark, for Bill, I'm Scott. We are past our prime.